Buon pomeriggio a tutti, grazie per esservi collegati quest'oggi con noi per questo speciale webinar Advanced Training. Introduco Nicolò Sessa, il nostro consigliere per il Visit USA, il quale ci parlerà del webinar di quest'oggi. Prego Nicolò, benvenuto.
Buongiorno and welcome everybody. This is our first session with the National Park Service. And thank you again, everybody, for joining at this time. It is 4 o'clock in Italy. I know this is a working hour, so that's really a big thank you for joining. We appreciate this new collaboration that we are going to be starting with the National Park Service. This morning or this afternoon, depending from who is speaking, we have 3 special guests. We have today Donald Ledbetter. He is the Tourism Program Manager. We have Doree Chung, the Management and the Program Analyst, and Josh Reyes, also Program Analyst of the National Park Service. Today, we are going to be speaking for the first session. We're going to be focusing on the parks of the Rocky Mountains. I think that's all what I can say today, because we're going to be just following the great words of our presenters. So thanks again for everybody for joining. And Donald, you can go for it now.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Nicolo, and hello everybody out there. Before we start our presentation, and we have some slides we'll be sharing, we do have some videos to share. So we're gonna show one introductory video with some great inspiring information about the national parks in the United States. So we'll show that first video now. Well, that was a video about the national parks in the United States that we made a couple of years ago for our anniversary of the National Park Service. And it's wonderful to be speaking with you today. Thank you so much for the invitation to present these educational and informational sessions to you in such a difficult year for all of us around the world with the pandemic, and something that's missing for all of us, something that we all love and cherish, which is the opportunity to travel and spend time in other countries, meeting face to face, spending time with each other. Your customers and clients are missing it as well. And so it's great that we at least have the technology to connect this way virtually and spend time together and prepare for those days in hopefully the near future when we can travel. Well, I have some slides we're going to share and speak to you about the national park system in the United States with some general information and also specific information about parks in the Rocky Mountain area of the United States. So I'm going to turn off my webcam as we go for now. And I do want to take just a moment before I get started to acknowledge and thank Massimo Lequenzi, your friend, your colleague, who I did not meet in person, but who reached out to me several months ago to ask about the possibility of putting this series of presentations together. And we had just one video conversation. And even in that one conversation, it was apparent his enthusiasm, his joy, his authenticity and love for travel. And it was very inspiring. And I'm sorry he can't be here today to share this with us. But so this presentation is in his memory. I'm going to share some general information about the National Park Service, and then my colleagues Duri and Josh will be talking about parks in the Rocky Mountain area of the United States specifically. So I'll get started here with some general information about the U.S. national parks before handing it over. The first observation I want to make and share with you is to emphasize the width and breadth of the national park system in the United States. And this is something worth talking about for a moment because most people are familiar with the famous national parks, Yosemite National Park, Yellowstone, maybe the Everglades, the Grand Canyon, the Statue of Liberty, the National Mall in Washington, D.C. However, it's less well known just how large the park system is, 423 units across the United States. We have national parks, we have other designations like national monuments, national historic sites, national battlefields, national recreation areas. It's all of the green on this map. We just added a new site last Friday. So there's a new park just last Friday added to the system because there are always more stories and more parts of the American character and history that can be added to this system. So I think the message here is that no matter where you are traveling in the United States, there are national park units nearby that can be added to a trip, that can be a great addition to a trip. Maybe a trip is anchored by visits to big national parks like Rocky Mountain or Glacier, but it's worthwhile doing some research to see what other national park units can be added to a trip, and that can really be a value add to a trip experience in the United States. Because in addition to the diversity, just in terms of the numbers of parks, there's an incredible diversity of experiences and activities and opportunities in the national park system. And all of them, I think, are ways to experience very authentic aspects of the United States. Real places in the United States where history took place, where important events happened in the history of the country, where important moments or movements were founded, and of course where beautiful and invaluable ecosystems and environmental resources are preserved and can be experienced. So this includes traditional outdoor opportunities, outdoor recreation, wildlife viewing, hiking, climbing, kayaking, rafting, things like that, but also exploring the places where history was made. We have, for example, where the Wright brothers executed the first human-powered flight in North Carolina. That's in the National Park System. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthplace in Atlanta. Places where great movements for equality and recognition were founded. Even labor rights, the labor movement in the United States. Key moments like that in our history are part of the national park system. Battlefields from our American Civil War, founding sites, important sites from the founding of the United States in Philadelphia, in Boston, in New York, in Washington, D.C., archaeological sites, indigenous communities, indigenous remnants of indigenous sites are protected in the national park system. So the width and breadth of those experiences is just incredible. And I think all of these national park units, even if they're less well known or maybe a little bit smaller, even a short visit will connect you to some important aspect of American history, American culture, American heritage, and really be a valuable addition to any trip to the United States. So that's a big, I think, big message today, is that width and breadth of the system and doing that research to add to a trip to the United States, looking at these many opportunities to do so. Now, I'm going to share a little bit of practical information before handing it over to Duri and Josh for the Rocky Mountain region. First, I just want to talk about entry fees for a moment. This is an important practical component of planning a trip to a park. Only about 108 park units charge entrance fees. Most park units do not, so 315 are free. So for those parks that do charge entrance fees, many of them look like this picture in the top left. Maybe it's a large landscape park or a park with one or a couple of designated entrances that you drive through. There's often an entrance station. You talk to a ranger, you'll get a brochure and a map, maybe a newspaper if the park publishes a newspaper. And the entrance fees range from $20 to $35 per vehicle, typically for 1 week of access. So this is a bargain. This is a tremendous bargain for families, for travelers in the United States. If you think about entrance fees for other activities, some parks may charge per person in different ways. Say you're accessing the park via ferry, the Statue of Liberty, Alcatraz in San Francisco. There are other places like that. Or for certain tours or activities might be per person. For example, in the bottom right, the National Mall in Washington, D.C. is an open air park. There are no entry points, it's open air. But to go up the Washington Monument there in the photo, you need a reservation or a ticket. And so there's a process for that, and there may be a fee associated with that. We do offer an annual park pass. You see the photo of it. This is the America the Beautiful Park Pass. It's $80 and is good for a year. If someone is taking a road trip in the United States and visiting more than 3 or 4 parks, it may be worthwhile to buy the pass, and it works for an entire vehicle. I recommend buying the pass at the first park you visit. Any park where you go through an entrance station and you have to pay to enter, you can buy a pass at that point. And that's by far the easiest way. It's too complicated, I think, to try to order it from abroad and have it before you go. It's really easy to buy it when you arrive at a park. So a little information about entrance fees. Now, when you visit a park, general information, generally, I always recommend stopping by the visitor center. The visitor center is such a heartbeat, a center of information and planning and experience for a park visit. At a visitor center, you can meet with park staff, park rangers, and volunteers. They can provide information about what's taking place that day, perhaps wildlife viewing, wildlife activity that's going on, special events that are taking place that day. They can answer practical questions, give you practical tips and information. A wonderful resource for orienting yourself to a park experience. Many visitor centers also have great exhibits and information that will peel back the layers of the park and really help you understand the landscape and what you're experiencing. However, I also strongly recommend doing some planning ahead of time for a park experience. You know, as vacation and travel experts, that there are many travel experiences that you can kind of lean back a little bit. You know, a cruise, an all-inclusive resort, a theme park. You don't have to plan too much, right? You're going to find the buffet, you'll find the entertainment, you'll kind of work it out. A park experience benefits from a little bit of planning and research ahead of time to orient yourself to the geography of the park, understand where different things happen in the park, think about what you want your experience to be like in the park a little bit ahead of time. That way you're not wasting time once you arrive trying to figure it all out. And we have a lot of trip planning resources from our website at nps.gov, different apps. We are about to launch a park system-wide app very soon. We'll recommend that. And also social media. Many of our parks are on social media. I recommend following them because they will be posting up-to-date information about what's taking place in the park. Now, some additional practical information I want to touch on. This is a little more about that planning process and the tools available for planning. I took a screenshot on the left of the Plan Your Visit section of the website for Yosemite National Park, for example. And you can see the extensive amount of information that is available for planning your visit. Things to do, places to go, eating and sleeping, directions and transportation. Many parks have shuttle systems or other transportation options. It's good to research a little ahead of time and be aware of those options. Also, in some parks, we work with concessionaire companies that operate lodging, that may run a ferry, that offer other visitor services. And you may visit their websites as well if you're booking lodging, if you're making reservations for a ferry. Other concessionaire websites may be useful as well. And finally, there's a website called recreation.gov that we use for other reservation requirements like camping, some tours, some ranger-led activities. Some other things are included in recreation.gov. When you research a specific park, there will be links to take you there if it's necessary. So it's a little complicated. There are several different websites, but these are some of the main resources, and you can always start with nps.gov. Finally, for me, I want to just mention briefly that we need your help in keeping our park visitors safe, keeping the people with them and around them safe, and preserving and protecting our parks. Hopefully, you can see that these photos, these are not recommended activities. These are not best practices for visiting a national park. This is not good behavior. And national parks are wild spaces. These are wild, open, on-curated spaces, right? And people do need to be thinking about their behavior. They need to be cautious. They need to follow the recommended signs and warnings and guidance and information. So staying on trails and boardwalks, being careful of your surroundings when taking photos, not getting close to wildlife, and of course, not damaging or putting graffiti on park resources. We want people to leave no trace. So when you talk with your customers and clients, we love it if you can add some information about being safe, about leaving no trace, just so that it's something that they have in mind as they're planning for a park experience. We don't want to see more photos like this. Okay, that's our general information. Now we want to talk about some parks in the Rocky Mountain area of the United States. Now, roughly, this includes the states of Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, parts of Utah. We can't talk about all of the parks in this region, of course, but we're going to highlight a few of them listed here on the slide. The major gateway cities to the Rocky Mountain area include Denver and Salt Lake City. Most people visiting this part of the country will fly, if you're coming from Italy, of course, maybe through New York or perhaps Chicago, and then a flight to Salt Lake City or Denver. And from there are great road trip opportunities from both of those places. Of course, you can also fly from Salt Lake City or Denver to places like Helena or Billings, Montana, maybe into Idaho and get closer. These are big landscapes. This is a big part of the country, so it is a lot of geography to cover. And we're going to cover a few highlights now. So we're going to talk about a selection of parks. And with that, I'll hand it over to Josh. And Josh, when you're ready, I'll advance slides for you.
All right, good morning. My name is Joshua Reyes. I'm the Fee Program Collections Analyst in Region 1 office in Philadelphia. I've worked for the National Park Service for over 18 years on the East Coast of the United States. And most recently, I served as the Chief of Interpretation at Sagamore Hill National Historic Site, which is the home of former President Theodore Roosevelt. This morning, I'm going to provide a very brief overview of 3 National Park Service sites found in the Rocky Mountain region. Let me emphasize that these photos do not do these special places justice. As the saying goes, visitors remember 20% of what they hear, 50% of what they see, and 90% of what they do. So I hope that all of you will find an opportunity to visit and experience these special places. First, we'll discuss Mesa Verde, which is Spanish for green table. This is one of the first National Park Service sites I can remember visiting as a child. This national park I have a special connection with because I had the privilege to do work here on a detail in 2004. President Theodore Roosevelt established Mesa Verde National Park in June 1906 to, quote, preserve the works of man. This was the first National Park Service site with a focus towards cultural history, and the continued preservation of both cultural and natural resources is the focus of the park today. Mesa Verde preserves nearly 5,000 archaeological sites and countless artifacts. Mesa Verde is also designated as a World Heritage Cultural Site, which is limited to a select group of destinations worldwide. Some of the images that you see on this slide, in the bottom left is Farview and Pipe Shrine House. Farview House is in the background and Pipe Shrine House is in the foreground. The middle image that you see is Petroglyph Point Panel. This trail provides spectacular views and is the only trail in Mesa Verde where you can see petroglyphs. And to the right is Cedar Tree Tower, which is found on top of one of the mesas. New slide, please. Cliff Palace is the largest dwelling in the park and inspires visitors to imagine what life was like over 700 years ago. Cliff Palace is an area of the park I still remember visiting as a little boy. I can remember climbing up those ladders that you see in the image and being there with my parents. Mesa Verde has a unique fee structure with $30 per vehicle in the prime season and $20 per vehicle in the off season. So be sure to review the park website for up-to-date information. In addition, Mesa Verde website, you can find itinerary breakdowns with plans ranging from what to do with a couple of hours to what to do with a couple of days. So be sure to, before sending any guest over, to consult the website. New slide, please. The 2 gateway communities found outside of Mesa Verde are Cortez and Durango, Colorado. Now in Cortez, you could find basic services like groceries, banking, pharmacies. Durango provides its own unique cultural experience in a historic downtown with restaurants, lodging, shops, and museums. Durango was settled in the 1860s and 70s as a mining town. And Durango is one of the largest of the Colorado mountain towns at nearly 25,000 full-time residents. In the bottom right, you see the Strater Hotel, which is a prominent landmark in Durango that opened in 1887 and is a designated National Historic Landmark. So be sure to include a visit to the Strater in your trip itinerary. There are a number of outdoor recreational opportunities in the Durango area, like hiking, mountain biking, and skiing. Next slide, please. Arches National Park is a landscape of contrasting colors, landforms, textures unlike any other in the world. The park has over 2,000 natural stone arches, in addition to hundreds of soaring pinnacles, massive fins, and giant balanced rocks. This red rock wonderland will amaze you with its formations, refresh you with its trails, and inspire you with its sunsets. Arches was established as a national monument in 1929 by President Herbert Hoover. One book worth a read before your visit to Arches National Park is Edward Abbey's Desert Solitaire, which was published in 1968 and where he reflects on his experience of living in the park. In 1971, Richard Nixon changed Arches National Monument to a national park. Like Torino, Italy in 2006, Utah was the host to the 2002 Winter Olympics, and Arches hosted a leg of the torch procession. Some of the images that you see on the slide in the bottom left is Balanced Rock. Balanced Rock is one of the most popular features of Arches National Park. Balanced Rock is located next to the park's main road, and it's about 9.2 miles or 14.8 kilometers from the park entrance. It is one of only a few prominent features clearly visible from the road. The total height of Balanced Rock is 128 feet, with the balancing rock rising 55 feet above the base. The other image you see on the right side, that's Delicate Arch. People come from all over the world to visit Arches National Park, and visiting Delicate Arch is on the top of many visitors' to-do list. In a park with over 2,000 stone arches, this particular freestanding arch has become a widely recognized symbol of the state of Utah and one of the most famous geologic features in the world. The light opening beneath the arch is 46 feet high and 32 feet wide, making it the largest freestanding arch in the park. Like Mesa Verde National Park, Arches has invested significant web space on itineraries, so be sure to review the website before solidifying your final plans. Next slide, please. A must-do at Arches National Park is stargazing. In addition to their stunning landscapes and rich cultural history, the darkness of a moonless night at Arches surprises many visitors. As few as 1 in 10 Americans lives in an area where they can see the estimated 2,500 stars that should be visible under normal conditions. In many cities, the night sky is completely obscured by the glow of urban settlement. At Arches, the naked eye is sufficient enough to witness a wealth of stars. Under the right conditions, common binoculars may even reveal the rings of Saturn. Arches' relative isolation from the artificial light of urban areas makes it an ideal place for viewing the night sky. In 2019, Arches National Park became certified as an official international dark sky park. The vehicle entrance fee at Arches is $30. New slide, please. If you have additional time, Moab is a beautiful gateway community where you will find a variety of services, along with restaurants, shops, lodging, and museums. The year-round population in Moab is 5,000. Moab attracts many tourists annually, mostly visiting nearby Arches and Canyonlands. The image to the right on this slide is a photo of Canyonlands National Park, and if time permits, please plan to visit that. Canyonlands National Park preserves over 330,000 acres of colorful canyons, mesas, buttes, fins, arches, and spires in the heart of southeast Utah's high desert. Canyonlands preserves the natural beauty and human history throughout its 4 districts, which are divided by the Green and Colorado rivers. The particular image that you're seeing here of Canyonlands is taken at Pothole Point. Pothole Point is an easy, self-guiding trail in the Needles district of Canyonlands. New slide, please. The final national park I'm going to discuss is Golden Spike National Historical Park. It was July 30th, 1965, Golden Spike National Historical Park was established under the protection of the National Park Service by President Lyndon B. Johnson. One of the greatest technological achievements of the 19th century was the completion of the first transcontinental railroad across the United States. Visitors to this park can see the location of the last Golden Spike driven. Park features include a walk or a drive on the original railroad grade, and you get a close view of turn-of-the-century replica locomotives. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad was a partnership between the Union and Central Pacific Railroad, Construction began in 1863 with the Union Pacific building westward from Omaha, Nebraska, employing more than 8,000 Irish, German, and Italian immigrants. The Central Pacific, whose workforce included over 10,000 Chinese laborers, built eastward from Sacramento, California. Each company faced unprecedented construction problems, mountains, severe weather, and on May 10, 1869, in a ceremony at Promontory, Utah, the last rails were laid and the last spike driven. The most famous photograph associated with the first transcontinental railroad I've included here, which is Andrew J. Russell's east and west shaking hands at laying of the last rail, commonly known as the Champagne photo. Russell's east-west was one of many glass plate exposures taken on May 10, 1869. More than any other image of the day, however, the Champagne photo seems to capture a defining moment in our nation's history. The other images you see here is from the 150th celebration of the driving of the Golden Spike, which took place just last year in 2019. The entrance fee to this particular park is $20 per vehicle. Thanks for joining me this morning. I'm now going to turn it over to Dory, who is going to highlight 3 more parks in the Rocky Mountain region.
Buonasera a tutti. My name is Dory Chung, and I'm a management analyst in our regional office in Denver, Colorado, and I live here in Denver as well. So this is my home region that we're talking about, so I am very excited to present 3 more parks to you. And we'll start with a park that's very close to home for me. It's only 3 hours from Denver, which is Rocky Mountain National Park. So Rocky Mountain National Park is what I would call a classic natural resource park. It has beautiful mountains, valleys, rivers, opportunities for scenic drives and photographing wildlife and everything like that. So I've personally been to this park about 5 times in the 2 years I've lived in Denver. And I often take my family and friends who visit here. Just a few months ago, I took a couple cousins that were visiting me to this park, and we had a great time. I'll tell you a little bit more about it. Like I said, this is only about an hour and a half from Denver and Denver Airport. And most people, when they visit Rocky Mountain National Park, will visit from the east side, which is the side closer to Denver. And as you enter the park, you'll come to the gateway community of Estes Park, Colorado, which is pictured on the lower left of your screen. And Estes Park is a historic mountain town, and it's surrounded by mountains at a high elevation, and it's very popular with tourists in and of itself. Even locals from Denver will come spend a day there. There's plenty of shops and restaurants and events for children. It's a great place to spend a day with a family. But from there, once you enter the park, you'll enter the east side of the park, where most of the popular highlights of the park are. And many of those center around scenic lakes like Bear Lake, which you see in the middle of the screen in the picture there. There's also Emerald Lake, and there are also some very famous mountain peaks on this east side, most prominently Long's Peak, which is one of the many peaks in Colorado that are above 4,000 meters. So for the more fit and adventurous tourists, many of them like to climb peaks like Long's Peak on the east side of the park. So there is a shuttle, this area of the park is a little busy, so there is a shuttle system on that side of the park, and a parking lot where you can park your car and take public transit to make it a little easier and less crowded or less congested. Lastly, another big highlight for this area of the park is Moraine Park Meadow, which is pictured at the top of the screen here. So it's a big open meadow on the east side of the park, and it's a particularly popular spot for viewing wildlife like bighorn sheep or elk, sometimes bear, those sorts of animals. So from the east side of the park, you can take what is called Trail Ridge Road, which runs across the length of the park, mostly from east to west. And I would say this is one of the most unique features of this park. Trail Ridge Road is the highest paved road that you can drive through in the United States, and it goes above 3,500 meters, and it will take you to a whole nother world. It's a very high alpine landscape. You'll find unique grasses and alpine flowers and obviously a spectacular 360-degree view of all the Rocky Mountains around you. So when I took my cousins there, that was the part that was most memorable for them. You know, they knew that the Rocky Mountains would have a lot of beautiful lakes and mountain scenery and pine forests, but they didn't realize that this kind of world was there as well, high up in the mountains. And you don't need to be a climber or particularly fit, you can drive up there. Although I would warn some people who are sensitive to altitude sickness that you may want to take some precautions while doing that, even in a car. But Trail Ridge Road takes about 2 hours to cross across one way, its whole length. And it would, from the east, it will take you to the west side of the park, which is less visited, but has a lot of beautiful things to see on its own. Since it's less crowded, it's often a better place to view wildlife, again, such as elk or sheep and other smaller animals as well. But this is also of note is that this is the origin of the famous Colorado River. So this river is a very, very important water source for the entire Southwest of America, including Las Vegas and Southern California. And this is where it starts high in the mountains as a small creek. So that's interesting as well. Coming out of the west side, you'll find another gateway community of Grand Lake, and then some very large lakes right outside the park, which can be good for boating and fishing. And not far from there, about 30 minutes, is also a ski area called Winter Park, and a sulfur hot springs area on that side as well. On the west side, that's about 3 hours back to Denver. But I will say that in the winter, the Trail Ridge Road is closed, so you may not be able to cross the park if you are visiting in winter. But that is Rocky Mountain National Park. So next slide, please, Donnie. So from Rocky Mountain National Park, we're going to Fort Laramie National Historic Site, which is about 3 hours north of Denver. And this is one of our historic sites, one of the premier historic sites in the Rocky Mountain region. And this was the site of a US military fort in the mid to late 19th centuries. So that was the period before Wyoming and many states in this region were even states. They were just territories at that point. So this was a very important post for the US military to survey and maintain some control over these territories. This was also a very important trading post for settlers coming from the east that were making their way to settle in California, Oregon, Utah, and other parts of the West. So this is where they would come and get new supplies, fix their wagons, you know, trade a horse for a mule, and so forth. This is also a place where many Native American tribes came to interact with European and American settlers and trade goods here as well. But most notably, this was also the site of the Treaty of Fort Laramie, which was signed in 1868, which is probably one of the most important treaties signed in that period of American history, that sadly had a part to play in the later Native American wars with the US Army in the rest of the century. But this is where it happened. And so for the site itself, it is there's no fees at this site. It's in a very rural area, so you'll get a nice sense of rural America, which is quite different from your New Yorks and Miamis and Los Angeles. But they offer a lot of free tours, even for a whole tourist group. If you call ahead, they'll give you a private free tour of the grounds, which include many historic buildings like the old Army barracks, the officers' quarters, the cafeteria, the fort canteen, which is the store. And many of these buildings are the oldest permanent buildings in the whole state of Wyoming, because this fort is older than the actual state itself. But one of the most popular events here, especially in the summer, is they do live weapons demonstrations for historical weapons like artillery and rifles from that period, which you can see in the upper photo in the upper right. They also have many other living history events. that photo of the gentleman in the period army suit is one of my friends who is an interpreter there. So he will act like a soldier, conduct living history, and give you a little bit of history and a sense of what life was like in that time. In the summer, they also have many other events as well. When I visited a few months ago, I was there for a musical event, which you can see on the right, which had people in period dressed in a classic string band ensemble that played folk tunes from the old American West, which was very enjoyable. So again, this is only 3 hours from Denver, and it's on the way to Mount Rushmore and Badlands, which is another 3 hours away. And from Fort Laramie as well, it's about 6 or 7 hours on the way to Yellowstone. So this is a great small stopping point, especially if you appreciate history and 19th century culture. So next slide, Donnie. So the last park I'll talk about is going further up north near the Canadian border, which is Glacier National Park. So this is another park which I would call a classic nature and wildlife park, as you can see from some of the beautiful scenery here. And this is my personal favorite. I visited here about 10 years ago in the summer in the prime season. And you know, of course, I was overwhelmed by the beautiful scenery and the views outside my car on the scenic drive, which I'll talk about. But also, you know, one thing that very impressed me was when I rolled down the windows in the summertime, the car got flooded and my nose got overwhelmed with the smell of berries in that season, which was, you know, they say smell is the strongest sense for memory, so maybe that's why it's still my favorite national park to this day. But here, you know, there's a lot of glaciers, obviously, that you can see, although less these days with the ongoing climate change. But beautiful glacial lakes, great opportunities to view wildlife like bears and mountain goats. Lots of beautiful alpine and mountain flowers, especially in the summertime. And this is a especially great place for boating, canoeing, and bicycling as well. So again, this is quite remote. This is way up near the border with Canada, and it is about 3 or 4 hours from some of the bigger cities in Montana, like Missoula or the capital Helena. And it's about 7 hours from Yellowstone. So most people come in from the west entrance, which is the village of West Glacier. That's a little closer to some of the main highways and Yellowstone. And from there, once you enter, you know, one of the main features of the road is going to the Sun Road. So similar to Trail Ridge Road in Rocky Mountain, going to the Sun Road crosses the entire park from east to west or west to east. And it takes about 2 or 3 hours to cross the whole thing. Another great feature of this park is that it has many big, beautiful glacial lakes. Two of the most popular are Lake McDonald on the west side and St. Mary's Lake on the east side. Lake McDonald, which is pictured on the upper right, is the one on the west side. That's particularly good for boat tours and canoeing and kayaking. And it's known as the Lake of Many Moods because clouds come in through the mountains and all over the lake and out all throughout the day. So depending on what time of day you come, you might have a different atmosphere for that lake. The lake on the east side, St. Mary's, which is pictured on the upper left, is probably the best place in this park for photography. Some very, very, very scenic, picturesque views there, like the one that's being shown. But you can also do boat tours and canoeing on this lake as well. And for both of these, many hiking trails, long and short, start from these areas as well. And there's lodging and other activities to be had there also. A third part of the park, which is notable if you have an extra day or two, is Two Medicine Valley, which is in the southeast part of the park. So there's a third entrance in the southeast part near East Glacier Village. This is actually the oldest developed part of the park for tourism. So in addition to the hiking and beautiful glacial lakes, you'll also get historic lodges and chalets that you can stay in or observe as a tourist. If you do want to stay in one of these historic chalets, I highly recommend reserving online ahead of time, as these can be booked very quickly, especially in the peak summer season. Here, again, it's remote, but one recommendation if you want to make this part of a longer trip is if you come out of the east side of the park at St. Mary's, that is only 3 hours north to Calgary in Canada, which is kind of like a Denver of Canada, which is very close to Banff National Park in Canada, which is spectacular in its own right for the Canadian Rocky Mountains. So, but whether you do that or not, you know, Glacier by itself would be a wonderful experience as well. So those are my 3 parks. Thank you very much, and I'll kick it back to Donnie.
Well, Josh and Dory, thank you so much for those wonderful overviews. And as you all can see, that is just a small number of the parks that are in the Rocky Mountain area. And we wanted to just give you a flavor of some of them, some big, noteworthy, famous parks, but also some of those smaller sites where you can easily add to a trip, add to an experience, and really connect with a unique aspect of American history, whether it's where the transcontinental railroads came together in Utah, or certain parts of history in the European and American settlement of the American West. And as you can see on this map, there are just numerous smaller parks and sites in the Rocky Mountain area that you can visit. And we didn't even talk about Yellowstone. I mean, Yellowstone is the most famous park in the region, and many of you are probably familiar with Yellowstone, so we chose not to cover it here. But I think we have about 10 minutes left, and instead of showing another video, we have another short video, but I see a lot of really good questions in the question box. So maybe we can address some of these questions. Nicolo and Leah, if that sounds good for you, and Josh and Dory, if you want to jump in for any questions, feel free to. So maybe I'll just start with some of the things that I see in the chat box. And somebody asked, what is the difference between national park and national monument? So regardless of the designation, national park, national monument, national historic site, all of these sites are managed and treated equally. You know, they're all part of this national park system. But the difference is how they get established. So parks can be established in 2 ways. The president can declare a site a protected area in the national park system, or the US Congress can pass a law and establish a site in the national park system. If the president does it, it's a national monument. That's what the president has the authority to establish, is a national monument. The president can declare a national monument. He or she cannot declare a national park or other types of sites. It's a national monument. Congress can declare national parks, national historic sites. They can use the larger kind of designations. And sometimes a site may be designated as a national monument first and later become a national park or become a national historic site for different reasons that aren't that important. So that's kind of the difference, but they're all, you know, treated equally. Someone asked about what is the new addition to the national park system? Well, it was just last week. I want to get the name right. The Medgar and Merle Evers Home National Monument. Okay, so this was a national monument declared by President Donald Trump in Jackson, Mississippi. Medgar Evers was an early leader in the civil rights movement in the United States in the 60s, and Medgar Evers was assassinated. He was assassinated in the carport of his home on June 12, 1963. So not as famous, of course, as Martin Luther King Jr., but he was an important early leader in the civil rights movement who was also assassinated. And so his home was added to the national park system. We include places like that because we need to acknowledge and learn from. It's a way that in the United States, we learn from that history, we preserve that history and talk about it, and hopefully learn from it. Let's see, other questions. I want to address one question someone said about entrance requirements, maybe reservations because of the pandemic and those kinds of controls. And Duri, Josh, feel free to add on to this. It is true that this year in the United States, a couple of parks introduced reservation systems in order to keep a cap on visitation. So Rocky Mountain National Park, for example, had a reservation system. However, those were temporary in response to the pandemic. I think in 2021, hopefully, if the rollout of the vaccines is effective and efficient and proceeding, hopefully there won't be a need for those kind of temporary reservation systems again in 2021. We'll just have to see as we go through the calendar year. However, there are several parks across the national park system that are introducing reservation requirements, other planning requirements. For example, north of San Francisco, Muir Woods National Monument, a small national monument with beautiful redwood trees, it has a reservation requirement for parking or for taking the shuttle to Muir Woods. So the most important thing is to do some research ahead of time, check the park website, make sure you know about anything like that that might be in place. So it's a great question and something to be aware of. Let's see. Do parks close during the night or can you enjoy all day and night? Good question. It depends. Some smaller sites, some smaller parks that are historic in nature or historic homes or structures, some sites that are archaeologically sensitive, that have sensitive resources that are priceless and need to be well protected. Some parks that have maybe one main entrance, through a one road and maybe have a gate. Some parks do close at night and will be open just for a set time in the day. In many other parks, especially the large landscape parks, Rocky, Glacier, Yellowstone, Yosemite, Grand Canyon, are open 24 hours a day. And of course, people are camping, people are staying and lodging, and they're just open, 24 hours a day. So it depends, basically. And Duri or Josh, I don't want to, dominate the Q&A. Are there any questions you see in there you want to tackle?
I saw one from Nicolo on is camping allowed in some national parks, and you just mentioned that people can camp. Yeah, many national parks have campgrounds and allow backcountry camping in the wilderness as well. A reservation, especially for the established campgrounds, and especially in summertime for this region where a lot of the parks are very busy, like Rocky Mountain and Glacier, you will really want to reserve campgrounds months ahead of time because they can fill up and be sold out very quickly. For backcountry camping, some parks don't require a permit, many do. And so that's a similar thing. It's advisable to apply for a permit ahead of time to make sure that you can get it. You can do last minute day before permits for many parks, but that is kind of dependent on what becomes available, so that is not guaranteed.
I see one question about ranger-led tours in a national park and guided tours of the park by a ranger or a ranger guide. Is there a ticket to pay? So again, it kind of depends. many of the large, really famous, really busy parks, Glacier, Rocky Mountain, Yellowstone, they often will have a schedule of tours or a schedule of ranger-led activities that is pretty consistent for a season. You know, it makes sense for the planning, right? With the staff, you know, every Monday at 9 a.m. and 3 p.m., there will be this activity, and they'll have a large schedule of events. That schedule is often published online when a park is able to do so. So you may do a little research and find that information online. Other places, other small parks, if there's less visitation, you know, rangers may be able to do something on demand. If you have a group show up, you know, the staff may have the flexibility to lead a tour just when there's enough people, you know, to make it worth doing so. So it really depends. You know, there's a lot of different variations there. Typically, there is no additional fee. These ranger-led activities are included. There are some places and some parks, say cave tours. We have parks that are caves, Mammoth Cave, Carlsbad Caverns. Those tours are very scheduled at certain times, and there may be a fee associated with those. So again, it depends a little bit, and it's worth doing some research online and doing some planning. I think looking at the time, I want to respect the scheduled time for this. And Nicolo, maybe you can address, we're still scheduling the next sessions that we're planning out. Maybe we can talk about that here as we close. But I want to thank Duri and Josh, a fantastic job you both did presenting just a snapshot of a couple of great park experiences. And we want to thank all of you for giving us this chance to speak with you and be with you today.
Thank you to all of you. I'm sorry because Nicolo has a problem with the things in the house, so is not online at the moment. And I will thank you very much for your participation, and also for the next. I hope in the next appointments we are going to organize for the future. Okay. So we will advise about the next appointments with the NPS.
That sounds good. I will just say a final recommendation. In the chat box, I put a website to the Park Service's tourism program. And at that website, there are links, many links to other information for the travel trade, including links to photo galleries, digital assets and resources that you can use, all sorts of information. So be sure to visit that.
Okay. Now I will, we have a video, correct?
National if you'd like, absolutely. We can do the final one, sure.
Okay, thank you. Great, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Ciao a tutti e vi diamo appuntamento al prossimo anno con i nuovi appuntamenti webinar dell'Associazione Visitusa. Stay tuned e buone feste a tutti. Stay safe. Bye.
You too. Thank you. Ciao.
Ciao.